The Siege of Leningrad is considered the deadliest siege in history, as an estimated 1.5 million people died during it. The blockade of the city was horrific and was incredibly destructive, and it lasted for over 2 years and 4 months. But what happened inside of the city was barbaric and horrific. Some historians have even classed it as genocide due to the starvation and destruction of the people inside of Leningrad, and the civilians suffered heavily. The capture of Leningrad by the German army was one of the major goals of Operation Barbarossa and the invasion of the Soviet Union. It was seen as a political stronghold, as it carried the name of Lenin, and Hitler wanted to destroy the city, which he believed was heavily linked to Bolshevism, the Russian Revolution and communism. But the city also had a lot of factories and industry, and it was the main base of the Soviet Baltic Fleet. But as mentioned, the horror inside of the city was shocking, and the civilians of the city were slaughtered. Join us today as we look at the horrific executions of the Siege of Leningrad, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Adolf Hitler was so confident in the capture of Leningrad that he even had invitations printed for people to attend victory celebrations inside of the Hotel Astoria in the city. But Hitler wanted to destroy the city completely, and also the population. It was said in a directive that, after the defeat of Soviet Russia, there can be no interest in the continued existence of this large urban centre. Following the city's encirclement, requests for surrender negotiations shall be denied, since the problem of relocating and feeding the population cannot and should not be solved by us. In this war for our very existence, we can have no interest in maintaining even a part of this very large urban population. The plan was to raze Leningrad to the ground, and then give this area to the Finns, but preparations then took place to attack the city. Finnish forces were in the areas north and the Germans were in the south, and the two armies had the idea of encircling Leningrad. The Germans had the idea that they were going to use starvation and a lack of food against the people of Leningrad, but inside the city the civilian population were being mobilised to make defensive fortifications. Many lines of defence were built alongside the city's perimeter, and as many weapons and barricades were gathered as they could get to defend the city. The rail connection to Leningrad was cut, and then Hitler stated that the plan was Leningrad first, Donetsk Basin second, and then Moscow third. But the city would then be encircled. The Germans considered how to destroy Leningrad, and they said that the occupation would be too costly, as they would need to establish a food supply for the civilians. But the High Command then decided to besiege the city and then bombard it from the air, with the city then systematically starved too. It was said that, before the war, Leningrad had a population of 3,103,000 and 3,385,000, counting the suburbs. As many as 1,743,129, including 414,148 children, were evacuated, and there were many civilians who were evacuated and moved out of the city. But as the city was surrounded and supply routes were cut off, the Germans would begin their air attacks. On the 19th of September 1941, an air attack hit which was very brutal, and it was the most severe that Leningrad would face, as 276 bombers raided the city, and 1,000 civilians were killed. Many of those were killed inside of a hospital which was hit by German bombs. There were many more air raids, and the infrastructure of the city was also hit, and hundreds had to run wherever they could to survive. It was important for the Red Army to try and establish a route for supplies to get to Leningrad, and they would achieve this in warmer months by watercraft being driven over Lake Ladoga, and in winter they would drive vehicles across the ice road. Vehicles risked being stuck in the snow or sinking through ice, and also being attacked by the Germans. But the effect that the siege had on the city was shocking, and the 2.5-year siege led to the greatest destruction and biggest loss of life inside of a modern city. The Wehrmacht looted and destroyed the imperial palaces and other historical landmarks, and they would also steal a large amount of art. Factories, schools and hospitals were hit with air raids and artillery, but the largest effect on civilian population, who remained to defend, was the starvation that they suffered. The 872-day siege caused horrific famine in the region, and there were also problems with water and energy because of the destruction. The starvation led to the deaths of up to 1.5 million soldiers and civilians. One cemetery inside Leningrad even holds 500,000 victims of the siege. The human loss was greater than the Battle of Stalingrad, and other battles on the Eastern Front, and some claim that the attack was in fact genocide. Civilians experienced extreme starvation during winter 1941, and they felt abandoned. The only food available was 125 grams of bread each day, and this contained a large proportion of sawdust and also inedible things. The freezing temperatures, which went down to minus 30 degrees Celsius, also caused a huge amount of problems, and distributing food also became a huge issue. In January 1942, 100,000 people died each month from starvation. There were even reports of cannibalism inside of the city, and people turned to eating human meat as food. There were many arrests for this, and over 2,000 cannibals were rounded up, and many of them were executed for eating people. One witness who worked inside of the Astoria Hotel, a landmark in the city, said, "The Astoria looks like a hotel now, but you should have seen it during the famine. It turned into a hospital, just hell. They used to bring here all sorts of people, mostly intellectuals, who were dying of hunger. Gave them vitamin tablets, tried to pep them up a little bit, but a lot of them were too far gone and died almost the moment they got here. I know what it is to be hungry. I was so weak I could hardly walk. I had to use a walking stick to support me. My home is only a mile away. I'd have to stop and sit down every 100 yards. Took me sometimes over an hour to get home. You don't know what it was like. You just stepped over corpses in the streets and on the stairs. You simply stopped taking any. It was no use worrying. Terrible things used to happen. Some people went quite insane with hunger, and the practice of hiding the dead somewhere in the house and using their ration cards was very common. There were many people dying all over the place. Authorities couldn't keep track of all the deaths. You should have seen me in February 1942. Oh Lord, I looked funny. My weight dropped from 70 kilos to 42 kilos in 4 months. One witness who worked inside of the Architects Institute summed up the feeling in the city. He said, "The moral effect is when a hungry man knows he's got a useful job of work to do. But there is no doubt about it. A worker stands up better to hardships than an intellectual. A lot of our people stop shaving, the first sign man is going to pieces. Most of these people pulled themselves together when they were given work, but on the whole men collapsed more easily than women, and at first the death rate was higher amongst men. However, those who survived the worst period of famine finally survived. The women felt the after effects more seriously than men. Many died in the spring, when the worst was already over. The famine had peculiar physical effects on people. So many people died we had to bury them without coffins. People had their feelings blunted and never seemed to weep at the burials. It was all done in complete silence, without any display of emotion. When things began to improve, the first signs were that women began to put rouge and lipstick on pale, skinny faces. Yes, we lived through hell right enough, but you should have seen here the day the blockade was broken. People in the streets wept for joy, and strangers fell round each other's necks. Now life is almost normal. There is this shelling, of course, and people get killed, but life has become valuable again." An officer inside of the Soviet army would also communicate the horror, and he said, "Many a time I saw a man suddenly collapse in the snow. There was nothing I could do. One just walked on, and on the way back I would see a vague human form covered with snow on the spot where in the morning I'd seen the man fall down. One did not worry. What was the good? People didn't wash for weeks. There was no bathhouses and no fuel, but at least people were urged to shave. And during that winter I don't think I ever saw a person smile. It was frightful, and yet there was a kind of inner discipline that made people carry on. A new code of manners was evolved by the hungry people. They carefully avoided talking about food." As time went on, the air raid stopped as the Germans knew that the hunger was doing its job in killing people inside of the city. There were attempts to break the city out of the siege, and it continued until January the 27th, 1944, when the Soviet Leningrad-Novgorod offensive expelled Germans from the southern side of the city. This was a huge effort, and it finally saw Leningrad being relieved from the suffering and horror. But as mentioned, an estimated 1.5 million people died as a result of the siege, and it was clear to the Germans that they wanted to starve the people and slaughter the city, as they wanted to crush it with its close links to Bolshevism and communism, with the city being named after Vladimir Lenin. It was Hitler's desire to crush the city, and it's remembered in history for being the deadliest siege in human history. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.